Hello, assalamu alaikum everyone. I hope you're all doing good. Today we will be presenting our study case for IT and Islam, and the topic we are covering is Exocortex. First of all, my name is Omar Abdulaziz, and let's get started with a quick introduction. So, what is Exocortex? It comes from the two words. Exo comes from external, and cortex comes from the word cortex, which mainly refers to the part of our brain that is responsible for cognitive activities and basically most of the brain functionality. So exocortex is used to refer to external brain or external artificial devices that help users or help humans enhancing their cognitive abilities or their human functionalities in general. Okay, so one example of exocortex, which is the one we're going to talk about today, is brain-computer interfaces, BCI. BCI was firstly introduced in the early 1970s as a tool that detects brain signals and translates them into executable output by a machine. So it reads the signals coming from your brain and it sends it to a machine that translates those signals into actions and activities for the machine to do. Okay, there is a lot of differences in the definition of BCI depending on the researcher or the scientist. Each one has their own special definition, but they all agreed that for a BCI to be considered a BCR or a brain-computer interface, it must have four main elements, which are detecting brain activity directly, providing feedback in real time, and classifying brain activity, as well as providing feedback to the user. So it detects the brain activity directly from the brain. It provides feedback in real time, so it sends it directly to the machine. It can classify what kind of brain activity is happening, and it also provides feedback to the user in the form of performing the task that the user wanted it to do. So in the case of, let's say, prosthetic, if the user was sending a signal to move a prosthetic arm, then the feedback to the user would be the arm moving. Okay. Most of the uses of CI is in the medical field. So we can see it helping individuals with problems communicating or speaking, where it reads or scans the brain signals and translate that into action for a computer or a machine, which then converts those signals or those words or sentences into speech. It also gives control for individuals who are paralyzed or like them. So again, you can think of prosthetic legs or prosthetic arms. It also helps in the rehabilitation of the spinal cord injuries. There are three main approaches to recording a brain signal to be used in BCI, starting from non-invasive to partially invasive to fully invasive methods. The non-invasive methods are basically collecting brain signals externally from the outside of your head, basically the surface of your head, so your temples, and basically external non-surgery needing method. Example for that is EEG, fMRI, and NIRS, while the fully invasive methods read those signals either from the surface of the cortex, so the surface of your brain, or from inside the cortex, which in either way both require surgery, and it's a very risky surgery because you're basically opening up your head, sticking a device either to your cortex or to your brain, or even putting it inside your brain to read the signals more efficiently. And of course, as it gets more invasive and it gets closer to the cortex, the quality of the signals that is read by these machines it gets better as we get more closer to the cortex, but it also, the risk of the methods increases as it gets more invasive, because you'll need to do a surgery to open up the brain and stick the device and so on and so forth. So we can see that the EEG method is the most common, even though it has lower quality of signals, but it's more safe. That's why scientists and professionals prefer to use it instead of going through the risks of doing a surgery. Okay, so that's like a quick brief about what is BCI and what it does and how it can help humans. With BCI and with the benefits of BCI comes multiple ethical concerns regarding what is human life going to be with the help of BCI, since BCI helps enhancing the human cognition and human brain functionality. There are multiple concerns about humanity and personhood, stigma and normalcy, autonomy, responsibility, privacy and security, as well as justice. And throughout this presentation, we're going to cover those ethical concerns. We're going to see how BCI relates to them, and as well as the Islamic perspective on them. Okay. So let's get started with the first concern, which is humanity and personhood. So what is personhood? Personhood, by definition, is the abilities or the features that one must possess to be a person. And let's not think of personhood as personality or identity of someone. No, personhood is what is needed or what makes someone a human. And what makes someone a person or a human is a set of abilities and a set of features that would, if they possess them, then they would classify as a human. And so those features such as consciousness, self-awareness, self-determination, rationality, autonomy, communication, morality, participation, movement, and other traditionally expected characteristics. Most of them are pretty straightforward. The traditionally expected characteristics can be either characteristics expected in a certain society, or characteristics expected in a certain religion or faith. Okay, there is a verse in Quran that says, this is the translation, we shall show them, human beings, our signs on horizon and in themselves, so that it will become clear that it is the truth. Is it not enough that your Lord is witness over all things? This verse from Quran just tells us that Allah has put signs for humans in the horizon, in the nature around us that is moving in a calculated order, and signs in ourselves, in human beings themselves, to prove to us, for us to look at them and see and understand that creation is real and God is real, Allah is real, and to help humans understand the right from wrong and promote the good for a larger community that we are a part of. We humans must look around them and learn from the nature and learn from the signs inside themselves and the signs in the horizons. Okay, so how can BCI relate to human personhood, or how it can affect it? So the advancement of BCI allows for a direct interaction between the brain and the machine, because basically we're reading human signals or brain signals and sending that to a machine to be executed, or translating that into actions to be executed by a machine. And this leads to enhancing human functions and cognition abilities, which might change one's identity and personhood. So various questions come into mind. Will BCI alter human nature and way of thinking? Will it interfere with one's morals and ethics? Will BCI users eventually become robots or like cyborgs who are half human, half machine? Those are all valid questions that we need to ask ourselves before going into BCI and doing research and doing experimentations. We must know what this might lead to, what is its limits, how it can affect human being and how it can affect our human future. And we must, as humans, using our brain, we must decide whether those are ethical uses or those are unethical uses, and we must put limits for them. From an Islamic perspective and Islamic ethics, there is a quick verse that says, no harm, no harassment. which basically means that there is no course of action that leads to one human being harming another should be adopted. And this applies to any course, any course of life. If this course is leading to harm, is leading to one human being harming another, then it shouldn't be adopted. And this applies to BCI as well. So it's clear that we need more moral analysis about what is permissible and what is impermissible when we're talking about human life, human dignity, and human personhood, which are the things at stake when we're talking about altering the human brain or interfering with the human brain, or machines interfering and controlling the human brain in a way. More research needs to be done to understand what are the limits of those machines, what are the limits of this technology, and what is permissible and what is impermissible when it comes to human personhood and humanity as well.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Shaila. I will be discussing the ethical concerns regarding stigma and normalcy. Stigma often plays a significant role in the choices that the disabled take regarding whether to use BCI devices to assist with their disability. Some may feel discouraged from using BCI devices because they may feel that it increases the stigma surrounding their disability. For example, deaf people may be discouraged from using hearing aids, which are very visible because they feel it draws extra attention towards their disability. On the other hand, other disabled people may feel forced to use such technologies because they may feel a need to conform to societal standards. The existence of such stigma highlights a need to change attitudes in society towards those who are disabled. Society needs to treat the disabled as equals and not underestimate their abilities. We as a society need to provide the disabled with the support that they need in order to lead fulfilling lives. We must not stigmatize their disabilities or judge them for how they choose to manage their disabilities. This shift in attitude will also empower those who are disabled to seek the support that they need to lead fulfilling lives and contribute to society in a meaningful way. This verse from the Quran provides an important lesson in how we must treat those who are disabled. The verse says, "The Prophet frowned and turned away because there came to him the blind man interrupting. But what would make you perceive, O Muhammad, that perhaps he might be purified or be reminded and the remembrance would benefit him?" A blind man had approached the Prophet asking him questions about Islam. But the Prophet had been preoccupied with preaching to some members of nobility and had turned the blind man away. This verse was revealed to the Prophet directly after this event to rebuke him for turning away the blind man. It tells us to not to underestimate a disabled person and think of them as being any less capable. Indeed, the blind man was no less capable of understanding Islam or benefiting from the knowledge. This blind man was the companion of the Prophet, Abdullah ibn Maktoum. The Prophet had gone on to appoint him as a muazzin along with Bilal ibn Rabah. In appointing him as a muazzin, the Prophet demonstrated that his blindness did not make him any less capable of fulfilling his responsibility as a muazzin, which is an important role in Islamic society. Another concern is a definition of normality, that is, what it means to be normal. Upon interviewing members of the public, it was found that people commonly thought that BCI technologies would allow the disabled to live a more normal life. However, some disabled people do not see themselves as being deficient in ability or being not normal. They see themselves as being different in ability and normal, but in a different way. Such people may regard BCI solutions as enhancements instead of treatments. This, this shows us that there is a need to identify what it means to be normal and what uses of BCI constitute treatment and which ones constitute enhancements. For this, we look into the Quran and the fiqh. In the Arabic language, there is no singular term that is used to describe the disabled as a social group. In the Quran, we find some terms that refer to specific disabilities. For example, Ama, which refers to blind, Asam, which refers to deaf, and Majnun, which refers to the insane. In the fiqh, we find the terms Marad and Marid. These terms are the closest in meaning to what we commonly use the word disabled for. Marad means disease and Marid means ill person. These terms are used to describe rulings for those who suffer from some physical or mental difficulties that prevent them from fulfilling religious duties in the regular prescribed manner. Examples of such rulings include rulings for Salat al-Marid, Iqrar al-Marid, etc. In other words, prayer for the deceased, testimony of the deceased, etc. From this, we can deduce that the disability may be considered as equivalent to illness. This is because the physical and mental difficulties that prevent people from fulfilling religious duties that come from illness also come from disabilities. Within the fiqh, there also exists a lack of a clear definition for what the terms marad and marid mean. From these two reasons, we can conclude that disability can be considered as equivalent to illness, and using something to help with a disability is akin to seeking treatment. Hence, we can say that the Islamic rulings on seeking treatment for illness applies on the use of BCI to assist with disabilities. According to most schools of Islamic jurisprudence, seeking treatment is permissible. This is the opinion of the Hanafi schools and the Maliki schools. The Shafi school is of the opinion that it is in fact recommended to seek treatment for illnesses.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Tinir and I'm going to present the autonomy aspect. So, in the sense of ethical concerns, autonomy can be defined as the capacity of an agent to act in accordance with objective morality rather than under the influence of desires, meaning to say that people think about their decisions by themselves without having external forces affect those decisions. So when it comes to brain-computer interfaces, there are positive and negative aspects to autonomy that can occur. So it can be helpful and positive when the BCI it can become a tool for providing alternative communications and mobility, for example, for patients suffering from various injuries affecting the nervous system, disabling them from speaking and communicating with their caretakers and loved ones. It can become negative if the role of the device is blurry or it's casual. This will have negative effect on the autonomy because you cannot objectively define the person's agency there is no fine line between figuring out whether or not this person thought of what they did by themselves or because of an influence of an external factor. So in our paper, we have split up autonomy into three main parts. One is whether or not the ability to use the information and knowledge to produce reasons exist. And second is whether or not the ability to ensure that the intended actions are effectively realized, meaning to say whether or not that person has control over what they are thinking or what they're doing. Lastly, the ability to enact intentions within concrete relationships in context. This will be explained further in the paper. So when it comes to Islam, Islam is already a complete and a comprehensive religion. So obviously, Islam also has something to say about personal autonomy. So Allah says in the Quran that we have indeed created man and woman in the best of molds, meaning to say that it's not necessary for any form of external devices to enhance our thinking or to enhance our ability, because Allah already created us in the best of molds. And there's also no compulsion in religion, right? Allah says in the Quran that there la ikraha fid din. And furthermore, we see Islam has this idea of ijtihad, which is individual autonomy. And this individual autonomy is not only constricted to individuals' right to make their own decisions and their own choices, but it also sets the context for measurements of engagement and deliberation, where we can see that the BCI devices can have consequences on. In conclusion, we think autonomy is an ethical concern because Islam by right does not permit a man to act as he wishes, and that we are limited by certain rules and regulations, which are usually based off of the Quran and the Sunnah, or the way of life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Idris. Today I will discuss the ethical concerns with regards to responsibility. First of all, we have to understand the definition of responsibility. According to Oxford Dictionary, responsibility is state or fact of having a duty to deal with something or of having control over someone. On the other word, when people have the authority of something, then they have to take the responsibility of it. And responsibility has a significant part in our life. It exists to regulate people's lives and make people to acknowledge that their lives are their responsibility. And of course, people are in charge with their actions in their lives. And there are many perspectives on how should we use responsibility for BCI devices. And the first suggestion that people have to take the whole responsibility even if their actions are intended or not. And some researchers stated that the BCI user should be held responsible for any unintended actions. These ethicists equate BCI use with the responsibility we assign to use of potential dangerous tools such as car, or the parents' responsibility for the actions of their children, and dog owners are responsible for the actions of their dogs. And the second suggestion, that companies must take the whole responsibility if there is any defect in PCI devices. And the other researchers stated that accidental acts should be deemed a failure of the system itself, and the economic risk of blame would be transferred to PCI producers, closed how suppliers of products are kept routinely liable of damaging events. And the last perspective, we cannot set up the responsibility roles in PCI devices because they have new features and attributes that we have not experienced them before. And they emphasize that the existing legal frameworks cannot accommodate the usage of PCI sufficiently because they contain novel features that may impact PCI users' assignment of obligation. And here is the Islamic perspective. Of course, Islam is valid for any time and place. And on the authority of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anh, the Messenger of Allah, peace be upon him, said, "Verily Allah has pardoned or been lenient with for me, my Ummah, their mistakes, their forgetfulness, and that which they have been forced to under duress. And Allah, of course, will not punish someone do something beyond him." And also, Ibn Umar radiallahu anh reported that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, peace be upon him, he said, "All of you are shepherds, and each of you is responsible for his flock. A man is shepherd of the people of his house, and he is responsible. A woman is shepherd of the house of her husband, and she is responsible. Each of you is a shepherd, and each is responsible for his flock." And at the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Quran, in chapter 2, in verse 195, "And spend in the way of Allah, and do not throw yourselves with your own hands into distractions, and do good. Indeed, Allah loves the doers of good." And lastly, if PCI devices would impact negatively on people's behavior, of course we have to prevent these devices on ourselves, children, and folk. And this is my part. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Personhood. My name is Jihad Roba. I'll be discussing ethical concerns with regards to privacy and security. Whenever we talk about data, we cannot absolutely talk about it without addressing the two elephants in the room, privacy and security. So what is privacy? According to Wikipedia, privacy is the ability of an individual or a group to seclude themselves or information about themselves and thereby express themselves selectively. Privacy, in other words, is whatever you choose not to share, basically. Now, what is security? Again, according to Wikipedia, security is the protection of computer systems and networks from the theft of or damage to their hardware, software, or electronic data, as well as from the distribution or misdirection of the services. So when we talk about security, what we have to pay in mind, or what we have to look for, are words like defense, shielding, protection, safety, and security. Like any system, BCI is not free from any threats, risks, and dangers. There is no doubt that many of the ethical adversities that were present in earlier technologies are going to migrate to BCI, especially issues regarding privacy and security. With the introduction of BCI, a very sensitive information such as human thought, feelings, and motivation are now vulnerable to attack and compromisation. This is unlike any other kind of data. This is data not in your hard drive, but this is data coming straight from your nugget, coming straight from your mind. When talking about BCI, two types of threats caught my eye. Firstly, brain spyware. Basically, it is malware used to extract information from your brain. An example is using a BCI device to play a game and you see a bank logo. The malware can extract the data from your reaction, then use that information to know which banks you bank with, your credit card information, and many more. Secondly, is third party data brokers. Data brokers are people who basically collect data, be it private or public. BCI data brokers can collect your private data straight from your brain, knowing what you like, and then selling it to big companies, sometimes even without your consent. Now, from an Islamic perspective, where does privacy and security stand? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah An-Nur, chapter 24, verse 27, O you who believe, enter not houses other than your own, until you have asked permission and saluted those in them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says in Surah Al-Hujurat, chapter 49, verse 12, O you who believed, avoid much negative thought. Indeed, some assumption is sin. And do not spy or backbite each other until the end of the verse. This clearly shows that people in Islam are ought to respect each other's privacy and boundaries, and to not invade each other's space until they're permitted to. And now we will talk about some countermeasures to deal with those threats mentioned earlier. These issues are meant to be handled and dealt with appropriately. With regards to BCI, some countermeasures were made to avoid security and privacy breaches. There are 3 countermeasures, and they include the first one, education. I think personally, education is one of the best countermeasures because an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If the users know the threat of BCI and what are the risks that come with the technology, they are better equipped to avoid being tricked or manipulated. So the second countermeasure is BCI Anonymizer. Chezik and Bonacci, the developers of such tool, didn't really go in depth in the mannerism by which this tool works. However, what they suggest is that the EEG signals, before they are stored, they are meant to be replaced by anonymous neurosignals so that the private information of the user can be kept safe. Nevertheless, the issue is that we don't really know how can the BCI anonymizer detect whether an information is private or not. And the final countermeasure is maybe just using other existing countermeasures from earlier technologies. One example that I can give is blockchain, basically. As a recap, we discussed what privacy is, what security is. After that, we also discussed the threats that BCI technology presents. Furthermore, we also discussed the Islamic perspective of privacy and security. Finally, we talked about the countermeasures that can be taken in order to deal with those threats. And hope you guys enjoy.
Next, we will be talking about concerns with regard to justice in BCI devices. So when we discuss justice, like other health-related technology, BCI devices, they raise a wide range of issues, and some scholars raise issues of distributive justice. So what do we mean by distributive justice? Distributive justice concerns the socially just allocation of resources. So it basically raises questions: for whom will this BCI device be affordable? Who will be able to afford this? Which social class will they belong to? Will it be affordable to everyone? Will the poor be able to access it? Basically, accessibility. Will the disabled people, who are the intended beneficiaries, these devices are especially made for them in many cases, will they have access to the technology? These questions, they require careful attention, especially during the design process. And when we look at the Islamic perspective of ensuring distributive justice, it is an essential requirement in Islam to ensure social order, Islamic social order, and it's also based on the concept of brotherhood in Islam. And we can see through this ayah from Surah
An-Nisa. It says, "O who you have believed, be persistently standing firm in justice, witness for Allah, even if it be against yourself or your parents or and relatives, whether one is rich or poor, Allah is more worthy of both. So follow not personal inclination, lest you be not be just, and if you do, if you distort your testimony or refuse to give it, and indeed Allah is ever with what you do acquainted." So this ayah basically is asking any resurgent, any Muslim, to make sure that justice prevails and to ensure distributive justice, to make sure the poor or the rich, they get what they deserve, rightfully so. The next major concern which raises when we talk about justice is research ethics and informed consent, right? As we can see, most of the BCI technology currently is still in the clinical research phase. So there is really a concern with regard to research ethics and informed consent. So when observing the research process of a specific BCI, we can conclude that it can lead to many ethical discussions of informed consent. This So, as a researcher, it is important for one to act responsibly and guarantee that their research does not in any way have a negative effect on the participant. So, participants who are, willingly signing up to participate in our research, they should have the research should have no negative effect on them. And when working with on BCI projects, we have to ensure meaningful, informed consent, and it's an ethical imperative. And informed consent to participate in research also requires the participant to have adequate understanding of the research and its risk. So over the years, well-known ethical standards and practices have been established over the years, and one of the popular one we'll be looking at is the ethics guidance from the 1978 Belmont report. So this report highlights three principles when it comes to research, ethics, and informed consent. So the first principle it highlights is respect for persons requires that subjects to the degree that they are capable, and they be given opportunity to choose what shall or not shall happen to them. So basically, whoever a person is who is participating in this research must be independent and have their choice heard. And this is provided that the adequate standards of informed consent are satisfied. Secondly, analysis of risks and benefits are determined, and the benefits justify the risk. So there should be always, we should know what could be the risks of this research and what could be the risks on the participants. Would it potentially have a negative effect on the participant? And when weighing the benefits and the risks, the benefits should always be higher. And thirdly, we have fair procedures and outcomes in selection of subjects. So while selecting subjects as participants, it should be done in a fair nature. It should not be from a particular community. There should not be discrimination when it comes to selection of them. And in Islam, the importance of informed consent can also be realized through Islam's continuous call for respect or independence of every individual and their right to make personal choices and arrive at decisions appropriate to them without any trace of compulsion or deception. And also their right to be protected from any harm, misleading, or encouragement or exploitation by any other, like by this research or something. So this is what Islam emphasizes on. So hence it's important for us to ensure informed consent is reached, and at the same time research ethics are followed throughout the research process. The third concern is is in addition to questions when raised due to distributive justice, there is also another dimension known as justice as recognition. So the concept of justice as recognition raises the questions regarding how one should ensure that groups are often, uh, socially positioned, such as disabled people or any minority group who are they are the intended beneficiaries of these BCI devices. How do they have their perspectives? Do they have their opinions on these devices heard? Are they respected? Were these devices designed based on their opinions, or were they just made on the assumption that they would need such devices? So this is one of the other ethical concern. So in many cases, we would have marginalized communities. They would be subjects of distributive justice, meaning the devices may reach them, but this would not be the devices they actually wanted. Their voices were not heard their in the design process, hence meaning they were discriminated against. So Islam is strictly against this, as can be pointed out by this hadith from Bukhari. The believers, in their mutual kindness, compassion, and sympathy, are just like one body. When one of the limbs suffers, the whole body responds to it with wakefulness and fever. So, in this case, we can see that we should ensure that every marginalized community's voice is heard in order for, like, in this scenario, we can say for the entire body to be working well. Similarly, for this research to be a success and to be ethical.
This is Shaila again, and I will be concluding this presentation. BCI technologies, especially when developed and used as an aid for disabilities, is an example of using scientific knowledge for human welfare, which is well encouraged within Islam. However, to allow the disabled to reap benefits, it is first necessary to change attitudes within society towards disability and overcome the stigma that is associated with disabilities and how people manage their disabilities. This is especially since using such technologies to aid with disabilities is permissible, since it is seen as akin to seeking treatment for ailments. The development of such assistive technologies also puts upon Muslims a social responsibility to ensure that all those who stand to benefit from these technologies have fair access to these technologies. The development and research that goes into such technology need to consider the needs of disabled individuals from all sections of society, especially those that are marginalized and are disadvantaged. However, any BCI technology that causes more harm than good becomes unacceptable. In order to be acceptable, especially within Islam, the technology cannot cause adverse physical or mental impact. It must maintain the personhood of the user and preserve their autonomy. Since everyone has a right to their privacy and to use secure systems, a BCI technology must also be held to the same standards. Moreover, even during research and development of these technologies, Those who participate in research must provide informed consent. That this informed consent must be free from any coercion or deception. That shall be all from us. Thank you very much.